And now, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Director of Insights and Impact, DataKind, JC Bonilla.
Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Good afternoon, everyone. We see some heads and transitional folks, so let me just get this set up and get the conversation started. We have a very interesting panel for you. This idea of the interaction between data, big data, and living. Specifically, we're talking about cities. And I'm joined by very interesting people here. It's quite an exciting opportunity to be talking to experts, people who have been thinking about these challenges around big data in cities. And today's conversation, it's going to be aiming around the challenges around data, looking at the ecosystem that is required for data, and somewhat of the frameworks that are making effective data partnerships at the city level. I'm going to be introducing the partners just by name, but on their first round of questions, we're going to be asking them to introduce themselves and basically position what is your data initiative, a little bit about the colors of the data that you work with, and just basically what is the scope that you're seeing today on your line of work as it relates to data and cities. So to my right, we have Dan Koch. He's the Chief of Staff in the Office of the Major City of Boston. Followed by that, we have Jonas Al-Nasir, who is the Assistant Director of the General Smart Dubai Office and the CEO of the Dubai Data Establishment. We also have Patrick Deckert, President and CEO of Xylem. And we have Dr. Pippa Malmgren, going by Pippa today, who is the founder of DRPM group and the co-founder of Robotics. Dan, let's kick it off with you.
Sure. So the initiative that the City of Boston has really gotten going in the past few years was operated off the premise of baseball. If you read the book Moneyball, you learn about how baseball did all of its analytics and found its competitive edge basically using one single stat for a very long time, which was batting average. But after A's general manager Billy Beane transformed baseball through advanced analytics, it became a whole new field. And we feel like in cities, we're still at that batting average level. So we came up with a system, a performance management system called CityScore. The idea being that we should be taking all of the things that we do to deliver city services, everything from library visitors to how quickly we clean up our graffiti, and we should score ourselves. And not only should we do that individually, but we should also give ourselves a score every day. So if you go to boston.gov/cityscore, it's publicly available right now, you can see literally a green monster, but for city services. And we found that it's a great way to streamline how we're doing our data and a great way for us to deliver even better city services every day in the city of Boston.
So the initiative that I'm leading is one of the initiatives of a Smart Dubai office and the mission of transforming Dubai to become the smartest and happiest city on earth. The data initiative of Dubai is the most comprehensive data initiative globally. It has a very wide coverage of driving an effective data initiative in a smart city by mandating the policies and regulations and the processes and the frameworks that is needed into guiding an implementation of how do you open and share a data into transforming city services into becoming a smart services, and also creating an impact of the data that creates people's happiness, and also harnessing the best value of the data into creating an economical impact, and also driving the innovation that the city can bring to the city into making more better usage and efficiency around city services. We also drive the initiative with both public and private sectors, and we also guide the implementation of a digital backbone that can host all of the city that can come into one place and be provided to the public through different portals for different needs and usage. And it's also about data that is open, but also most importantly, data that can be shared cross-organization, both in public and private sector.
Great. So good afternoon, thanks for having us here. Xylem, I'm the CEO of Xylem, and we're a company that's 5 years old. but our brands go back more than 100 years. We were born out of a company called ITT Corporation about 5 years ago, and we are one of the few water-focused companies around the world that's actually publicly traded on the New York Stock Exchange. When I joined as CEO 3 years ago, we were really traditionally an original equipment manufacturer in the water space, focused mainly on wastewater, but also clean water networks. But over the course of the past year or more, we've really been evolving ourselves to be much more of a technology company. We spent about $1.7 billion last year to acquire a terrific company called Census, which was traditionally born out of the water metering space, but also came with that a quite sophisticated telecommunications platform as well as a data analytics capability in the water metering space. So our path going forward here really is now to be working with cities and municipalities around the world. We operate in more than 150 countries globally, to be able to build out not only smart clean water networks, but also smart wastewater networks, as well as outdoor water, to really help our customers focus on 3 big pain points. First is the productive use of water. Non-revenue water is a big revenue loss for water utilities around the world. Water makes it to its end of use but never gets effectively billed or it gets hijacked along the way. It's the quality of water, but also the resilience of cities and water infrastructure around the world. And the last note, with that acquisition came a capability also with electric and gas utilities, as well as building smart lighting systems around cities that we'll talk about more in a moment.
Great. So I'm a manufacturer of drones, and I got into this space partly because I found that 95% of all the drones in the market were toys. And industrial firms, governments were trying to deploy toys to do heavy tasks, and that most of them didn't have any data management capability, or that was sold as a different thing that you paid an additional price. And we decided that actually what was required was an incredibly robust, highly flexible physical platform that was reliable in the sky, that marry it to a data platform in the cloud. And knowing that incredible sums of money are being raised all over the world for innovation in software, so you don't actually want to create a software solution, you want to create a data solution that you can overlay with any software that the market brings to bear, because the speed of the innovation is quite extraordinary. And also, this will connect with, fuse with, many other sources of data and input. So for example, we have microsatellites today that are 1,700 miles up in the air, and they're able to broadcast a granularity of information down to 30 centimeters. But you also have, in all the clothes you're wearing, RFID chips that are the third of the size of a dimple of a golf ball. And those are also broadcasting. So we kind of see the data management of this particular piece of equipment as something that comes in a spectrum of data management. And customers from governments to industrial corporations are going to have to find ways to fuse and merge, and to be able to look at it ever more effectively and take advantage of all the new innovations in sensors, in software. And personally, I think it's incredible how wide open this space is.
Absolutely. So very interesting perspectives right from the get-go, and I think one of the things I love for us to start thinking about is in the, let's call it a linear approach to data, right? Data management may start in a very simplistic point of view. We gotta collect it, clean it, aggregate it, and then we gotta mine it, diffuse that insight, and eventually some type of evaluation takes place. At scale, my first question, is this kind of meta process, collect it, analyze it, diffuse it, and evaluate, does that apply? Are you seeing that maybe that process requires some type of changes? And if I could really ask you then, at the very, very, very beginning of this equation, the collection, what are the challenges that you're seeing? Data is rich, whether it's captured from up above or comes from our rivers and water, but what are the challenges you're seeing in the process? And it's also if you can focus on the collection part. Pippa, let's start with you.
Yeah, well, first of all, again, people are not yet using the current capabilities very well. So for example, in insurance, we now have the ability, you can take something like this and get data, you can go over your asset, whether it's a building or a dam or whatever, every day for 2 years before the event occurs. then an event occurs, and now you merge the previous data with the post-event data, separate it, and you have a 3D image, but it's not just that, it tells you how much damage occurred at that event and how much occurred incrementally in the run-up. So your ability to do the lawn loss adjustment is very different. But having said that, so insurance companies are just beginning to get their head around how we can do that. But now we have something brand new, which I think everybody should look at, which is D-Wave. Now that is quantum computing. Quantum computing is a whole different level. And so our capacity to manage a magnitude of data is about to be exponential. Volkswagen just bought the D-Wave quantum computing machines from the company in British Columbia. It's absolutely mind-blowing when you think we can't really use effectively what we have now, and we're about to go exponential. So we have to change our mindset about how we manage data.
I wonder if you could tell us a bit more about what you mentioned a little bit about the state of the art in collection of data. Do you see any disparities at the city footprint in their ability to collect data to what you're discussing right now?
Well, and again, it's a question of who has it and what they're looking for.
Right.
I gave a talk at a conference recently of fashion designers, people in the luxury world. And again, with the RFID chips in your clothes, they literally know who goes to church on Sunday, who's having an affair, where you shop.
Oh boy.
I mean, literally, you are broadcasting through the signature on your cell phone, your RFID chips, tracking devices that are facial recognition driven. So it much depends
that actually
on what you're
suggests that
looking
bigger data
for.
may not mean better living.
Well, I actually think we have to ask a very profound question, which is it better to be data rich or data free? And I think that being data free is going to become a luxury item for individuals. Just one tiny last thing. China has just introduced something called a social credit system, where you borrow your mom's car to drop off a package. It clocks that you've done this and that you've made use of her disabled parking permit, and now your mortgage rate goes up because you took that corner. You did something not quite right. And the fact is, we all have to think about an Uber score for individuals in this environment and the ethical implications of that. Because some of the data, we want it, it's important, but it brings other challenges too.
Awesome. JC, I think, working with cities around the world, they're all in some way collecting loads of data. They know they need to have access to the data. They know that there are insights in there, but it can be overwhelming as to where to even start. And so the approach that we take in working with certainly water, gas, electric utilities is to really help them understand not the data they're gathering, but what problems are you trying to solve? What really affects the everyday life of your constituents in your city to give them a better life. And it's oftentimes very, very simple problems that are being resolved here, but not easy to solve. And so I think it's important for cities to understand they don't need to build this capability on their own. They really need to bring the subject matter expertise of what are the problems that are trying to be solved, and then partner with other companies or other sectors. Let us do the data gathering, let us do the data mining, we can do the analysis around that, but we need their lead on what problems are they trying to solve.
Let me ask you a CEO question, and I don't know if this is fair, but as you look at your organization in developing capabilities, and these capabilities sometimes are fueled with intentional investment, are you putting more emphasis in any of these parts, to run your business in an effective way? Is it in the collection, is it in the mining, or other parts of the business?
Yeah, so in the case of ourselves in Xylem, what we love about our FlexNet, which is our telecommunications platform, is that it is agnostic. We are able to use that network to connect with other people's devices, whether they be in the wastewater sector, the clean water sector, outdoor water, it can be lighting, anything that you can put a sensor on. This is one way, along with drones, to capture the data. So we've already made that investment. We make that secure. It's got built-in redundancy in the event of weather events, much more robust oftentimes than open wireless or mesh technology. But secondly, what we've really been focusing in on is how we leverage the data capture and the data analytics to bring knowledge to the customer. In our case, one of the biggest pain points for utilities is energy consumption. anything that we can do to help them reduce their energy bill or to reduce their labor costs by minimizing unnecessary truck rolls to go out and repair something, that drops right to the bottom line that they're actually able to go fund other critical investments along the way, because we all talk about these funding constraints around infrastructure, but there's a lot of opportunity out there right now in the existing cost base to make that much more efficient.
Awesome. Then let's go to Boston. I mean, hearing a little bit of the emphasis on state-of-the-art at the city level with city score. What are the challenges, and how does this conversation react or change your perspective? Or are you seeing similar challenges?
Yeah, and I think Patrick is right on about using the existing infrastructure and trying to figure out how data can improve. The way we look at it is, first of all, our data collection management system is our constituents. And there's a multitude of ways to get data from constituents. We've really segmented into low, medium, and high. So for people who want the low level of engagement, we have smart trash cans all around our city. We've replaced all of our typical industrial trash cans with smart trash cans, the ones with the blinking lights and the solar panels. I think Manhattan has them as well. But what a lot of people don't realize is that whenever you throw a piece of trash into that trash can, we have a data visualization of green, yellow, and red about how full the trash is throughout the city. This allows us to take that existing infrastructure, save money by optimizing the routes of the trash pickup trucks so that they're not going down a road they don't have to, and then everything is based on time and demand, and we have the historical data. For medium levels of engagement, we've partnered with Waze, the app that a lot of you may have on your phone that your Uber driver may have used to get here, though this place was kind of hard to find, regardless of whether you had Waze or not. That goes back to us. We get all that data, and actually our traffic management people in our traffic center time our lights based on how we're seeing the Waze data come back. So instead of just looking at a camera at an intersection, we're timing it in a smart way, and we've seen traffic impacted by up to 15% in some intersections because of that smart use of data with existing infrastructure. The last and final thing is that we've taken kind of citizen reporting on issues and see something, say something to the next level. We have a 311 app in Boston. You download it, and not only do we deliver services based on what people are reporting to us, but we try to make it personal. So for example, in Boston, if you take a photo of a pothole, not only will you get a photo of a filled pothole back, but you'll also get a photo of the team that filled it. Right, so the idea is creating a feedback loop that makes you feel good. It makes you feel like Boston's really taking your concerns seriously and making people more likely to give that kind of data.
That's very interesting. Jonas, the perspective of Dubai on this problem.
Yeah, I think the way that we are leading a data initiative within Dubai is having two ways. The first way is this holistic approach, and how do you understand and how do you govern the data within your city, because we know the value of the data is not with the biggest data. The value of the data is the ones that you can identify that has the most valuable impact within the city, and how do you identify those? So creating a proper framework and proper processes with a mandate and with having the right policies that can support of how do you identify the data within your organization, both public and private sectors, and how do you prepare those data from cataloging, inventorying all of those data, identifying them, and also looking at its confidentiality and its privacy, and preparing it so that you can really harness those data and come up with the biggest value and the impact that we are taking here of an example. So this was one approach. Another approach we've also driving towards the data is that we identify from the city needs what are the problems that we want to solve within our cities, and then by understanding our problems, then we also take it through our data initiative into identifying those data that can solve those problems and bringing it into one center platform and providing it as much as possible as an open data, so that there is no one single eye on that data. It's a collaborative approach that you're bringing both public and private sectors, individuals, businesses, to come together and harness that data. And the ones who are really the best at harnessing it, they will create the value and creating that impact. So if the government are the ones who understand and realize the benefit of those data, let them drive it and let them provide the applications and the services that enhances the experience within the city. If the public sectors or academias or innovators or entrepreneurs who can really harness those data, let them come over the platform where these data are available through it, and also get the insights that can really spark those decision-making within the city. So it's two ways towards how do you open and share data, but also taking into considerations all of the processes and all of the standardizations and also policies that you require to address different challenges, and how do you exchange and open the data seamlessly, efficiently, and also very safely.
Let me ask you both, Jonas and Dan, a question on, from your point of view on delivering, these services at the city, governance type of a point of view. If you can give me spectrums of good or bad, is there some type of policy that permits this kind of democratization of data, the access of data? You spoke about data in a really holistic way, which is beautiful. It makes a lot of sense, but I know that sometimes regulation and policy either fuels that or just stops it. Are there something that you can talk about and say, okay, these are best practices, so this is really good, and data democratization and the use of public data really augments with this, and this is a huge barrier. Countries around the world, cities around the world, please stay away from it. Yeah. Is there such a thing?
I think so. I think it starts with the leader, right? Mayor Marty Walsh was the first new mayor in Boston in 20 years. And so we had the luxury of starting off with a clean slate and with the mayor's mentality that we needed to be, the best data-driven city in the entire country, right? And so the way we hired our cabinet, the way we thought about creating an infrastructure for CityScore was all based on that ethos, right? And so we hired our chief of education, we hired our chief of economic development, we hired our chief of streets and transportation, all based on the criteria, will they create a data-driven culture within their organization? Because you can have the best infrastructure set up, you can have the most reliable data in the world, but if the people who are taking that data and then applying it don't buy into it, it's not going to go anywhere. So for us, I think it was the culture was the most important thing in terms of making sure that that was sound and people really bought in before executing.
So yeah, totally agree with you. Data culture, or creating a culture of sharing data, is totally a new mindset that you need to create within the organizations within the city over here. And it was really important for us that we started, yes, with a mandate from the ruler of Dubai into creating this a sharing of data by a mandate of opening and sharing data across the city, by setting also through this mandate a collaborative approach by identifying the sets of responsibility on the entities that are providing those data, but also to create an establishment, which is a data establishment, is responsible of guiding this implementation in the city of Dubai. But it's also what was important for us, and how do we address this culture change? Because it's not only enough to provide a mandate with a set of policies and regulation. So we needed to create leaders of this initiative within the organization in both public and private sectors. So we came up with the concept of data champions. Data champions have been created across organizations. We have more than 200 data champions that are coming from more than 30 organizations at the moment from the public sector. We've provided them with also sets of trainings and programs that drive this culture change and make them more compliant onto how do they address the data sharing within their organization and lead it towards more of governing the data and cataloging and inventorying all of those data, all the way to that they also harness the value of the data by creating the data insights for their organizations, and also preparing their data to be aggregated with other data sets to create more insights for the city. So it's a very collaborative approach. It's also how do you empower the different leaders within different organizations to come across one page and understand how do we move the entire city and its all ambitions of how to become smarter, and also how to open and share data through a maturity model where everyone are speaking in one language, and addressing of how do they really open and share data very collaboratively, rather than they do it themselves into silos and everyone finds a different solution into how to address a data.
Great. I'd like to introduce a pivot. The title of this panel is Does Bigger Data Mean Better Cities? ? So let's just assume that the challenges of connecting data are past, and you actually have great, awesome data. That is clean, by the way. Let me just add that to the equation. So let me ask you the so what. Cities are diverse. Last time I checked, my neighbor and I, we just don't get along very well. And then let's take that at the footprint of, at the agency level, right? Everyone's got a very different missions. We may be mission aligned, but service delivery is different. Perspectives at the neighborhood level, at the building level, just basically a very heterogeneous landscape. So how can cities get better? You have perfect data. How do you go about mining data and producing this, impact in people's lives when we have a data-driven culture, you have the right infrastructure for capturing data, and all these things that have been mentioned? Pippa, you want to give it a shot?
Yeah, I think your question is also related to, again, this next step change that we're coming into, which has to do with the introduction of blockchain technology. And as an economist who has advised presidents, prime ministers, I have to say governments everywhere are very interested in the notion of blockchain plus electronic money. And when you add those two together, it changes the whole management of data because, for example, you no longer need to fill out a tax return because every transaction is taxed at the point of transaction. So when it comes to cities and urban areas, when we talk about how we're going to manage the data and is it in the best interest of the citizens, we have to understand it's going to a place where there's a totality of knowledge of every transaction, every movement of a person or an object in that environment. And that's why I come back to some of these privacy issues, which, you're almost giving away your age by even mentioning privacy, right? It's an old folks issue. But I do think that it is going to be important. Citizens are everywhere, are going to have questions about how much am I being watched? Already we don't really like it when Google starts sending us advertisements based on the last Google search that we did. And I think that therefore the role of government and frankly local government is going to become larger. After all, politically, cities are becoming more powerful political units in the world than countries. That's clear. And so, as someone working for the mayor of Boston, your power and your influence is enhanced enormously by the magnitude of data. It takes power from Washington and moves it to state capitals. So there's so many different implications of this.
Well, let's go to Boston. How do you mine data? How do you bring value?
Well, I think the reality is, what we always say is, it's great to have fancy data, as you say, nicely clean and all of that, but the data is meaningless unless you're actually doing something effective with it that helps people every day, right? So it's a broad spectrum. It's as light as when people drive out of their driveway every day in Boston, if they don't hit a pothole, they don't have to deal with going to the repair shop and thousands of dollars of damages on their car. If their trash is picked up on time, they don't have to worry about, when do I have to put it out again and all of that stuff, right? So those are little incremental changes in people's lives that I think make things a lot better. But when you take that to an extreme, we really feel like using data in a smart way saves lives. We are doing an experiment right now with our firehouses. Historically, the jurisdiction of where a fire is and which firehouse dispatches a fire truck was based solely on radius. What we're looking at now is, are there certain areas of the city in which traffic is more congested in a given day that even though the firehouse is geographically further from the fire, it's actually quicker to get there, right? And so that incremental 1 minute or 2 minutes, and another thing that we're doing with the fire is also being able to have an iPad pop up the schematics of the building on their way, right? So you combine that response time and having that data literally can save lives, right? And we're also doing a similar thing with our ambulance response times and various 911 calls. We're finding that a large portion of them are actually non-emergency, so we're launching a bike unit instead of having to send an ambulance every time there's a call. And so these are the ways that we feel you're taking this data that is very kind of high level and fancy and all of that, but making it in ways that not only make lives incrementally better, but at the end of the day can actually save lives.
So I think this is when it becomes more interesting now to address, okay, what I can do with my data now, since I have addressed all of the issues of how do you really exchange those information and make it available. This is where we are looking at in Dubai. Our leaders want anything that happens globally, wants it to happen 10 times faster in Dubai. So in order to do that, you need data to empower all of the decision makers within the city of Dubai in order to be able to take better decisions. And this is where the data can solve lots of answers that they do have, and also can spark lots of policy decisions that we can really change and enhance. And now using those changes towards really creating a better insights into going to the future much faster. And also, it's solving some of the issues that the city has. For example, in UAE, we are looking into segregating the economy from the oil. So UAE has a mission of, in 2050, now to celebrate the last barrel of oil that we are producing. And in order to do that, data can be a new digital economy where we really can add a lot to our economy of the city over here and have a better planning so that we can really create new opportunities around businesses that can be created, and new ways of that we can add to our economy. We know that we have a study today that we've done around the impact of opening and sharing the data, which we'll be launching in 2 weeks' time from here, and of how much the data can impact on the economy once it's being shared and exchanged within the city over here. And it's also, we are looking into how to create people's happiness, which is at the center of any initiative that's happening in Dubai. How we create a better life for every individual, for every visitor that's coming in Dubai. This is where we are solving lots of issues that we have. So we know that Dubai is an international city. We have lots of visitors that are coming into Dubai or moving into Dubai into creating their businesses. So we've created apps and solutions based on these data so that they can place their businesses better in Dubai, or they can really pick what would be the neighborhoods that they would like to live in, or what kind of schools that they would like to put their kids at, so that they have a better lifestyle in Dubai, wherein it's more focused around the experience,
right,
and have them focus around their businesses that they moved in as a reason of why they came to Dubai over there.
Right.
So a lot of these interesting scenarios that would be the city will be capable of solving and really coming with great insights towards how do you solve those issues.
Thank you. Patrick?
I'll keep it real quick. So in the spirit of giving you guys cocktail conversation bits of examples of smart infrastructure,
Useful.
We're very pragmatic. I mean, again, I go back to what Dan said. I mean, what problem is a city trying to solve? And there's a lot of them. And it's important for leadership to understand what are the citizenry saying to them they need to have solved. So a few things out of 100 things we could talk about. One is think about what Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia has done in terms of their floodwater management, a city that used to be underwater on a regular basis. They built multiple tunnels of traffic flow with predictive analytics from a weather monitoring standpoint of knowing when they were going to be going through a typhoon, to where they're actually able to predict when the water levels are going to rise. So they actually have to shut down the lowest level of tunnel, divert the traffic so that the city is not underwater. Major impact on the quality of life for people across KL. You've got Chattanooga here in the US that smart lighting was an important issue for them. They were trying to do urban development. They had big safety issues, a big energy bill, and so just slapping sensors on LED lighting and being able to regulate when you dim down, dim up, spotlight for a crime event, safety around campus is a big quality of life issue for people. The third, which is not so sexy, but I'm sure none of you probably know, or if you know, that the biggest pain point for a water utility is the fact that up to 30% of the water that is treated and been invested in either never makes it to its point of use or is not billed appropriately. They lose 30% of their potential revenue. That is a huge impact on their capital budget and restricts their ability to invest in new infrastructure. So we as citizens ought to give a real damn about that, because that's a big part of the water bill that we can help them resolve through smart data and smart networks.
Awesome.
Yeah, actually, just one last thing on this point. Again, I find it so interesting. We get very, very focused on the data and the software and the analytics, but we kind of think, oh, the hardware and the business of getting the data, that's easy. But in fact, there are incredible constraints. So for example, we've worked in the water industry, that companies, they cannot tell what is the volume of fluid in a reservoir. And we've got a sensor that now does that for them off a drone, but you would think that there would be easy ways to do that, and it turns out no. Or, for example, if you have a crowd or a terrorist event and your public safety police department wants to get a clear view, there are no drones in the market that have parachutes. So we decided we'll put parachutes on them so that you diminish the risk to public safety, It sounds such a simple point, but nobody had developed parachutes on drones, which are binary. They're either flying or falling. There's nothing in between.
Right.
So your ability to gather the information about what kind of a crowd are you dealing with, what kind of a terrorist event is in play, we totally take this for granted. And I think that we're going to find in a few years' time that so much human talent, energy, innovation has gone into the data without much thought as to the actual collecting of it and how do we get the sensors to the right place. It's very mundane, but I promise that there are many practical tasks where we can't collect the data because we just missed the practical application.
I said it was a scenario where we had perfect data, right? But absolutely, the challenges are incredible. Folks, we're at time, and I encourage you to continue the conversation with these experts. It's fascinating to hear the perspectives of Boston, Dubai, the private sector and utilities, and a little bit of drones and things up on the sky. And one of the threads that we wanted to bring up, but I really encourage you to continue the conversation with them, is that it does take a village. The aspect of partnerships and the ecosystem required for their success stories to actually become a reality. Same thing for you. So thank you very much for joining us, and have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now, please welcome Regional Director, North America C40, Brendan Shane.
Hello, everyone. Pleasure to be here. And I'd just like to go right ahead and welcome my guest, Mayor Robertson from Vancouver. Thanks for being here. So we're by the virtual fireside here today. And I did want to say a special thanks to Mayor Robertson for coming in, along with his team. It's a real privilege to get to speak with you today, but also to work with the whole team in Vancouver as part of the C40 Cities Climate Leadership Group, where Vancouver has had a standout role for a number of years now. And I'll just make a quick shout out because there's a number of other C40 cities represented here today. Obviously, our host, New York City, Toronto, Amsterdam, these are just the ones on the program. Los Angeles, Boston, Dubai, Philadelphia, Washington, and I hope I'm not leaving anyone out. So enough with that commercial for C40. You were first elected mayor in 2008,
right,
and now in your third term, which is a significant accomplishment just in and of itself. But I wanted to focus in on the fact that you've made a key priority of the modest ambition of making Vancouver the greenest city in the world. And you have the Greenest City 2020 action plan that's been in place for several years with goals across jobs, carbon, environment, and economic growth. And specifically around ending use of fossil fuels now and moving to 100% renewable energy by 2050. So I think the first is just a general question of why you've made that ambitious greenest city goal is such a priority for Vancouver.
Yeah, so the greenest city by 2020 goal is one that I first campaigned on in 2008 to be mayor and be elected with a majority of council that were committed on that goal. We had overwhelming support getting elected, and in two successive elections rolling out this greenest city goal. So it's a comprehensive plan that we put together, over 35,000 people in the city of Vancouver, which is about 2.5 million people overall. But we had 35,000 involved in shaping the plan, setting the targets, metrics. There are 10 big goals, so it's kind of like a decathlon. When we say greenest city in the world, you have to score very high right across the board. So in Vancouver, we already have, we've done very well with clean air and clean water and local food. We've got great agricultural land that's protected around the city. We have We have a challenge with water consumption. We get a fair bit of rain in the winter in Vancouver, so people don't conserve water very well. That's one that's a tough goal for us. But overall, it's setting that goal is really a combination of making sure that we're taking care of quality of life. People love the city. It's a beautiful place. We want to take care of it for the future generations. And it's also an economic initiative. We are generating an enormous number of green jobs to reduce our waste, to reduce our water consumption, to ensure we dramatically reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, climate pollution. So there's job creation baked into the whole piece. And that has really, I think, been a big part of the success of this. We've seen green jobs growing at triple the rate of the rest of the job growth in Vancouver. And we have a lot of job growth. In Vancouver, we're at 3.5% GDP growth in 5 years. And we're seeing significantly more green jobs created than the average rate of job growth. So it's been both economic and environmental initiative. And ultimately, it's engaged, I think the big success for us is it's engaged a ton of people in the city at a neighborhood scale, a lifestyle scale, being able to contribute to a big aspirational goal that we've set as a city.
Yeah, I wanted to drill in on a couple of pieces in particular because there's been emphasis around bringing technology and innovation, in particular district energy systems, and now very much with moving to electric-based for heating and transportation. So could you talk a little bit more about how certain those or other technologies are playing a role?
Yeah, so we've got, in Vancouver, our electricity is renewable. It's hydroelectric power, and that represents, in our overall energy usage across the board, it's about 31% of our energy use is currently renewable. We burn natural gas in many of the buildings, and we burn gasoline and diesel in a lot of transportation requirements. So we still have in our goal to go 100% renewable energy, the big challenge is going to be shifting away from natural gas for heat in our buildings, and obviously shifting to zero emission transportation options. So, and in those two fronts, energy efficiency is huge for buildings. We now have basically a passive house standard coming into play. Zero emission buildings are now, as of last week, a requirement for rezonings. So we have a very aggressive green building code that is ensuring by 2030 every single thing that's built in the city will have to be zero emission, and that'll dramatically reduce the amount of fuel and fossil fuel that is burned to heat the buildings. And at that point, we're looking at fuel switch, getting off of natural gas, using hopefully electric technology for heat, but also looking at obviously options with renewable natural gas that we make in our landfill currently, and with compost facilities. We're generating some of that right now, and that'll have to scale up. And basically weaning the whole city off of fossil fuels as quickly as we possibly can. But with the overall goal right now is, depending on the transportation world, 2050 is what we assume we will be able to achieve that goal of no use of fossil fuels in our city. It's hard to predict exactly when the transportation industry is going to make that shift. We're looking at, as many cities are around the world right now in the C40 network, at big district energy systems, so that, for instance, all of our downtown buildings, we have a very dense downtown, kind of like Manhattan, not quite as big, but many of those buildings are hooked up to a steam system right now that is a boiler using natural gas. It's the biggest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions in the city, and we need to switch that off of natural gas and onto renewable energy. So that's one where a large-scale system, and we see this in Scandinavian cities. We see it a number of cities around the world now that have big district energy systems that are shifting to renewable, and some that are going from coal to natural gas as a transition. But the sooner that we can get off of natural gas onto renewable energy, the better, as we're seeing in the natural gas world massive fugitive emissions of methane at the source of where the gas is being fracked most often now. So there are major impacts. Natural gas is not the clean fuel that the marketing has promoted it as. It is a fossil fuel. It has climate impact, and we have to grapple with that. And so that's a big piece with our buildings and the heat that's needed in them.
I'd like to maybe dig in on that for a minute, because Canada, I believe, when we checked, is the 5th largest petroleum and fossil fuel producer in the world. So presenting a zero carbon and 100% renewable vision for Vancouver in the context of your province, of your federal government, even though they're progressive in many ways, how's that play?
Well, it's not popular with the oil and gas industry. We've actually been recently targeted by the big gas utility in Vancouver, who are running quite inflammatory and totally inaccurate statements that we are banning natural gas, and kind of fear-mongering with restaurants that use gas stoves, people that have gas barbecues and fireplaces. So we're seeing a very almost tobacco company type behavior from the gas utility in Vancouver. And that's alarming. We've have huge fossil fuel projects that are in development in Canada right now. There's pipelines that have been approved with the Trump government here green lighting the Keystone XL pipeline. There's another source or export potential for the Alberta oil sands. We have a pipeline approved to Vancouver for oil sands fuel as well, to export that fuel to China, where it gets refined, pollutes the Chinese environment, and is shipped back to North America as gasoline and diesel and other petroleum products. So there have been huge protests against the approvals of these pipelines. I would say that right now there's big pushback on coal and oil sands, gasoline in particular. But natural gas has not had a lot of blowback. I think there's been decades of marketing it as natural and clean fuel, and it's been, I think, pushed as a transition fuel off of coal, so the coal plants can shift to natural gas. It's not the solution, and I think the sooner that we are looking at massive improvements in energy efficiency, so we're not required to burn a bunch of energy to heat buildings in particular, but then looking at renewable ways of supplying that fuel. That's what we have to work towards as aggressively as we can. And cities are where most of the fossil fuels are being burned. So this is where we need to put our focus.
Yeah, and I can say that conversation and the work that you're doing there to look into the future, set policy, is very much being watched and by cities around the world, which is.
Yeah, I'd say the one difficult piece is that when there's no alignment. We have a federal government that has approved fossil fuel pipelines, a provincial government that's approving natural gas activity from fracking in the north of BC to exporting LNG from the coast to Asia, and promoting natural gas use in the city. So that's not aligned with the city's goal to be 100% renewable. And we have challenges with that. Some countries, if you look at the success in Denmark and Copenhagen, in Holland and Amsterdam, when the cities and the national governments are aligned on energy policy, they can make a lot happen. There's a much more rapid trajectory there. They're talking about 2025, 2030 for their eliminating fossil fuels in their cities. And that's because there is alignment between levels of government that are focused on that goal. And it remains to be seen whether the private sector can deliver all the technology, and particularly with transportation, whether they can wean everyone off of fossil fuels at that kind of a pace. But I think getting governments aligned is an important piece of this. And right now, obviously in North America, that's not the case. We have national governments that are still very much pro-oil and gas. And that's at odds with the Paris commitments that both of our countries have made. And it's obviously at odds with the impacts of climate change and massive expense with Hurricane Sandy, with the sea level rise that we have in Vancouver. It's a $10 billion bill that we know is coming down the pike to us to keep the ocean out of our city. And you see that in Miami. You see massive expenses being racked up. If we don't dramatically reduce our impact on climate, that cities are going to feel the brunt of that expense.
To your point about the role that the federal and the provincial or states have to play, I mean that obviously in the U.S. people are reassessing right now with a new federal government, in many instances with hostile state legislatures as well. So cities sometimes are lucky to have alignment with their state. Sometimes they are confronting opposition from the state and the federal level. I'm wondering, I guess, if you could get this province and the federal government to do the one or two key things for you, what do you need to see from them to help the city move?
That's a good question. So we obviously need the tools and the jurisdiction to be able to do this work. I mean, in Vancouver, we do control our bylaw for buildings. We set the building code, and we've been able to make it the most aggressive green building code in North America so far. So that said, the provincial government, in the midst of an election, which happens in 6 days, the provincial, one of the parties just announced that they want to rescind some of our powers in our building code so that consumers can burn natural gas if they want to, as long as they want to. So there's a direct intervention that's being proposed by the party that's currently in power to take away powers from the city to, around energy policy and specifically around land use and buildings and our building code. So. And those are powers that are typically entrenched at the local level, which it would be incredibly disappointing and unfortunate if that's the case, because voters have supported, for 3 terms now, a government that's very committed to this path. So that's where, in terms of tools, we need the ability to do our own thing and to set those laws in motion to take action to go green. That's. And that can be, there's a lot of challenges with utilities generally, and I hear this from lots of cities in the C40 network. When mayors get together and talk about this stuff, most cities don't have control over our utilities. A few do. Copenhagen again does, and they have been able to do massive wind development off of their coast, and they've been able to green their energy supply very aggressively. But most cities have utilities that are either privatized or are state or even federal. So that not having any control over the energy policy and the energy supplies is a challenge that is going to be very hard for us to deal with as cities. That's a tool. If we could have more jurisdiction around energy. And the transportation piece is a mixed bag as well for cities. We would love to see more electric vehicles. We'd love to see higher and higher fuel emission standards for cars and trucks. So in many cases, cities don't have that jurisdiction at state or even federal level as well. So, buildings and transportation are the source of almost all of the climate pollution, and obviously almost all of the energy use within cities. So in order to really affect that and make good change, we have to have more tools to do that. And I'm not seeing a dramatic shift happening. It's these kind of upstream structural issues between levels of government are not easy to solve, not easy to change, and it's going to take a lot more pressure to have success at that.
I wanted to be sure to put in context too that the greenest city is one of your priorities, key priorities, but you also have equally challenging ending street homelessness, addressing housing affordability, and really focus on improving public transit. You've mentioned some of those, and those are themes that have come up repeatedly in the presentations and the conversations here today. So. And then you put all those together as a package of ambition for 2020 and for your term. So sort of a general question there too. To get the kind of progress you've made a lot of progress, and I think Vancouver is looked to by many around the world for the progress you've made. But to keep that progress moving, to take advantage of the latest either technology or policy or innovation, I'm curious, what kind of a team you think you need to put together to be able to keep a bureaucracy in a city moving forward?
Well, that's a good question. It's bureaucracies are typically harder to change. People generally stay in the system for their whole entire careers, and it's not actually that easy to recruit people into public service. It's proving to be a bigger and bigger challenge. So getting new thinking, we get, in our case as a council, we got elected with a mandate to end street homelessness, to be the greenest city in the world, to build a creative economy in our city, and those weren't goals that the city staff were working on diligently. So we made a lot of big changes in terms of the agenda, and it's been over 8 years now, and we have made a number of changes with staff, particularly at a senior level where council has the ability to do that, and we've brought people from all over the world that want to work on these goals, want to put a city on the leading edge, and with not only environmental but these social and community-based goals, which are incredibly important. That the equity piece is a huge challenge for us in Vancouver. There's an enormous amount of investment from all over the world into Vancouver. Same thing with New York, same thing with London or Hong Kong or Sydney, Australia. There is a group of cities that are landing spots for global capital right now, and that has created a huge inequity between what people earn in the city and what real estate is worth. And that's something that we're really struggling with right now. We can get more affordable housing if we go green with the housing. We know if we bring energy costs down over time, we're going to save money for people. If we build more transit, we build a better bike network, we're going to make the city more affordable for everybody. So I think there's a lot of goals that we have that are win-wins. We call them triple word scores. If they can achieve triple bottom line outcome like that, and that's getting, we've been able to attract great leadership in our bureaucracy, and I'd say in our business community as well, because we're very clear about our goals, and people want to come in and work on them and create business opportunity or create change in their public service job. And I think we're benefiting from a brain gain, because people want to work on the leading edge of these challenges. And our hope is that whatever we learn and develop there, it's open source. We share it with cities around the world, because we're stealing ideas from other cities around the world all the time. Whoever's on the front edge of something, we're happy to pick up those ideas and run with them.
Well, you mentioned sort of business engagement, and I wanted to highlight a project that you and Mayor of Copenhagen, helped initiate within the C40. We call it the City Solutions Platform, and this is really trying to sort of push cities and service providers together with also third-party or academic experts to try to identify the cutting edge in a given area. And then provide out to not just your own cities, but to cities all over the world, what's the standard you should be shooting for, and how can you get there? So I don't know if you could talk a little more about how you've engaged private sector and business in particular around one solution or more generally.
Yeah, I would come back to our goals around green buildings as being one where the initial response from the development industry, from construction and the trades, was lukewarm, maybe, to be friendly about it. There was a lot of uncertainty about what this would mean if we went, when we started talking about bringing in LEED Gold as a requirement, certified LEED Gold for all rezonings. And we did it, and we did it actually with a major process around consensus with the industry, and to their credit, people stepped up. I think they realized the life cycle analysis, the costing, it made sense, and their buildings are worth more. The energy costs obviously go down over time, so I think that's one where it looked like it could have been a fight, and even now we've taken it a couple more steps. We're talking about zero emission buildings, we're talking about passive house standards. We're now building large buildings, and the first passive house tower, I think, is going to be coming in for approval later this year. So the industry's actually embraced these opportunities. In many cases, designers, construction firms, and green building technology providers are using what they've learned in building in Vancouver. They're exporting their products or their services to cities in China, for example, and around the world. So it's turned into a great business opportunity for many of these companies. And so, it's been a win-win in the end. And that's one where where there was uncertainty initially, but they came on board, and now actually there are many industry leaders that are pushing the pace, and they're competing because the product, the passive house type product, does better on the market. That's what people buying, the consumers are asking for that. So it's a really good news story, and it's logical and it's efficient and it makes sense at every level. It's just there was some uncertainty around it in the early going, and there certainly isn't now.
Well, and we heard earlier a comment about the real benefit of people seeing something actually get done and built. So seeing the first passive house tower, and not only to inform the community you have there, but across Canada, across the world. Being a laboratory for that kind of thing to get built really helps advance the ball. I wanted to, before we end, I wanted to come back to a couple questions around the sort of theme here of powered by people, because you mentioned several instances about the amount of public support that you've had, engagement in the planning process, but there's been a lot of conversation here about how public engagement is changing right before our eyes, maybe week by week, month by month. And so curious, as you're moving on Greenest City or those other initiatives, how you see that sort of dialogue, the engagement you're getting with the broader public and the community, how it's changing, and ideally how there's this more symbiotic, how this more positive relationship of government and the people working together.
Yeah, I'd like to think it's getting more and more symbiotic. It certainly it has its challenges. When there's big change in a neighborhood, and it affects people very directly, it does require a lot of engagement, a lot of consultation. We've dramatically increased the amount of consultation, advance notice, workshopping, walking around in neighborhoods with people, with planners and engineers, and mapping it out. We're doing a lot more of that on the groundwork, a lot more just dive right into it with people where they are to try and talk through the change, and also using digital tools in terms of this is what it's going to look like, or 3D printers to build new models in a quick way to be able to show this is what it will look and feel like. I think that's making a big difference. So using technology to tell the story and to actually map it out, chart it out, people be able to visualize the change that's coming. At the same time, it's we use all the social media tools. We're kind of all over this stuff, but it is hard to get everyone's attention. Everybody's busy and has so many inputs, so much information right now that knowing about a particular rezoning project or a change that the city's proposing is not always top of the radar. So that's always going to be a challenge. We just have to keep stepping up and trying to figure out where we can, where we can provide the information in a digestible form and meet people where they are. So we've done a lot of work on that engagement piece. I think it's come a long way. It's gotten a lot better. We've learned a lot from other cities that I think are having more success with it, but it's just hard work. You just have to be dedicated and focused. And we get criticized for spending on communications and engagement. Like we have this, it gets spun as having a giant PR team at City Hall. It's 25 people or something like that. And actually most of those people are doing community engagement on all these big pieces, working on major planning projects, working on Greenest City stuff. It's actually very direct, and if we don't do it, there's a lot of blowback the other direction, and that's what we absolutely don't want. That we want to be sure we've done everything we can to to consult and feel supported by the community when we're making big changes. And we got a lot of big change to make, so they got to go hand in hand. If we're going to push the pace of change, we have to step up a lot more on the engagement front.
Well, I think you're describing right there the unique role of cities and the really critical leadership role that you play and fellow mayors play, that to be pushing the agenda while taking the flak for how you're pushing the agenda, trying to move policies forward despite really challenging day-to-day work. I guess the last question would be, as you're looking to the next year or two, what's out there as sort of that next challenge that you're either already moving or that you're looking to other cities to help you, other cities or companies or combinations of those to help you keep things moving on your agenda?
Yeah, well, we've talked about a few of them. It's certainly the goal to eliminate fossil fuels. It is a race, and we're seeing dramatic changes in the energy industry right now, and the majority of energy investments in the United States in 2016 were in renewable energy. So it's already happening. The market is already speaking. Industry is already going there. But we need to figure out how we do it on the ground in cities, and we have not figured it all out yet. There's a ton of work still to do to figure out what that looks like and how it rolls out over time. So we've got big challenges with respect to energy and the pollution associated with it. And I'd say generally the growth in big cities around the world is massive. It's a huge amount of housing and commercial space that has to get built. It needs to all get built at this much higher standard and be energy efficient, be healthy buildings. So the sooner that we're turning those dials over, when we're building so much in our cities right now and densifying our cores, it creates a lot of pressure. And we're kind of used to taking flack that comes with the territory. I think what will be a real challenge is to rally enough support, enough political support to keep up the pace here and to make sure that we're not doing shortcuts, we're not missing every opportunity to green our cities and to do it in an equitable way that makes sure that the green jobs go to people who need them and that the cities remain affordable by nature. They have to remain affordable places. New York and Vancouver are struggling with this in particular, and that piece, the overlay of green and affordable, they really have to stick together.
Well, I want to thank you for joining us today, and in particular, thank you for the urgency and the vision that you in Vancouver are bringing to city leadership. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks all.
So hello, my name is Elise Kissling. I'm from BASF. We are a chemicals company. We produce materials for everything that's in basically everything you make or buy, including stuff for the built environment. And I'm here with Maria.
Hello, I'm Maria Yolova. I'm the co-founder of Terraform One. We are a non-profit design group right here at the Navy Yard, and we are focusing on the environmental future of cities.
So you may ask yourself what a nonprofit like Terraform has to do with BASF. We produce basically the baking powder that's in this stuff. BASF, for its 150th anniversary, which we celebrated in 2015, decided to look at some major global challenges, but to do it with people that we wouldn't normally talk to. So people like Maria from Terraform, who were thinking about design in the built environment. And we also hooked up with NGOs and other corporate partners to look at problems like resilience to climate change in urban environments. And we thought about doing it by looking at the very local level, not looking at big market studies and things like that. And after hooking up with Maria, she said, why not take a look at Red Hook, Brooklyn, which is right around the corner.
So we decided to look at the neighborhood of Red Hook because of the challenges that it's facing after Superstorm Sandy, but also because it's really closely knit community. So for this process, we invited community leaders and residents that included designers and artists and local business owners to participate in the process of co-creation, and we spent a whole week thinking about the future of Red Hook. So you're about to see a short documentary that tells the story. Please roll the documentary. Thank you.
Right now, we're in a coastal city.